Well, hello and welcome to the very last episode of A Photographic Life for 2025. And as is traditional, it's something slightly different. We're joined this week by Bill Shapiro and Fiona Hayes, are regular contributors to the podcast throughout the year. And as traditional, we look back and we try and look forward. Now, I have to say that we tried our best to come up with some kind of a script, and we sort of thought about the things we're going to talk about. Well, the script went out the window, and so did the things we were going to talk about. So get ready for a free-flowing, rigorous discussion about photography. Well, Fee, well, Bill, welcome back. Another year passed and another opportunity for the three of us to meet and chew the cud.
Fantastic to be here. Nice to see you both.
Likewise, and I'm ready. Let's do this.
I think so. Boy, have we got a lot to talk about. This could go on for days. We're recording this around the middle of December. I'm just trying to think. It's 17th of December that we're recording this. Obviously, you're listening to this at New Year. Goodness knows what will have happened between the 17th of December and then in the current way the world is going. But the big news of today is something we all wanted to pick up on because I think it's got so many interesting threads that kind of weave into different elements of our conversations. And that is Christopher Anderson's photographs of the inner team at the White House in Vanity Fair, connected with an article, which in itself is a story. But we're going to deal with the photographs, and I'm going to start with our American correspondent, our Alistair Cook, for those of a certain age. Bill, what do you think?
I mean, I love these pictures. I'm a fan of Chris Anderson's work. I've been for some time. I love these pictures because they're so surprising. Because they are a reminder, because they've sparked so much discussion, and in that they are a reminder of the power of photography and the power of photojournalism, the power of an artistic singular take. But mostly the thing that struck me in looking at these pictures and really looking at them is how they're a reminder of how dishonest most celebrity photography is.
Yeah, it's a facade, isn't it? It's a manipulative marketing tool on the whole. Not these though, but I think, and let's dig deep. I think that the White House thought that they were going to be Annie Leibovitz, and it was all going to be beautiful and glamorous.
Well, of course, because this is, these are people, and the listeners will soon hear, if they haven't already suspected, what a liberal I am, and how I'm such not a fan of this administration. This is an administration that is incredibly arrogant, and although they are incredibly suspicious of the media, these are people who should be media savvy, including the press secretary, and they miss the cues and the clues. Certain kind of lighting was not brought in for these shoots, and we can talk about that. The way people were positioned and where they were set up was not done the way an Annie Leibovitz or somebody else would do it. And so they missed the cues, and they were arrogant enough to think one thing, and they got something completely different.
Do you know what, Bill? I don't think it makes you liberal. I think it makes you human. But Fee, what do you think?
I was just kind of like preparing last night. I was scrolling, doom scrolling as we all do, and the story popped up, and my first thought was I just kind of scrolled, and then I scrolled back and thought, oh, that's quite odd. What's going on here? And quite quickly I realized that these pictures were obviously not what you expect from a Vanity Fair cover story or major story about politics and so on. And it was quite interesting because I thought it was quite interesting that a lot of the people who were looking on Instagram, first of all, last night, were going, "Oh God, how can you platform these horrible human beings?" Whereas a lot of people on Threads at the same time, I'm talking about kind of 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock last night UK time, were going, "Oh wow, there's something really strange going on here." It was very much, it was kind of subtle at first. People didn't realize what they were looking at. And it's really only when you stop and you do look into the details of what's being shown, like the Botox scarring on her lips, like the Marco Rubio looking really small and looking down into a lamp, like the number of sockets on the background of Blair or whoever it is who's in there. And then you start thinking, okay, actually, something really strange going on here. Something is not a glossy magazine, a Vanity Fair. Many of us as art directors, the first thing you do if you see things like this is you start, oh, retouch, crop, make the people smaller in the pages. They didn't do any of that. It's obviously meant to make a statement about the people who are being photographed. And wow, does it make a statement?
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're very honest pictures. And I will say this, like I've been to the White House, I've walked in, if not those exact rooms, some rooms like that. And the White House is incredibly small. Like it's no Buckingham Palace. It is a very small building, and it's made to feel grand, oftentimes in photos and certainly TV shows. But I love the fact that Chris Anderson, the photographer, humanized these situations and showed them as they really are, and not as that we want to imagine them to be. And Fiona, in terms of those comments about how dare you platform these people, that's ridiculous. They're not being platformed, they're being shown for who and what they are.
I
I
totally agree. But that was the thing that was happening yesterday. People didn't notice at first. Various people, lots of comments didn't notice at first the details. They just went, "Oh my God, you're showing the White House admin. Why is Vanity Fair doing that?" It was only when you stop and you do look at Chris Anderson's pictures and you look at what he has shown, you look at how he's used his lighting, you look at the fact that there's absolutely there's no smoothing of any wrinkles in anybody's clothes. There's no kind of moving of messy details unless to get them more in shot. That's when you realize this is all done. This is, as you say, it's honest, but it's also, you could very easily have just said, Catherine, could you kind of like pull down your jacket a bit? It's bunching around your waist. But
yeah,
you
but
still
I think there's a really key factor to all of this. And as a photographer who's taken these kind of pictures, I'm going to bring this element to it, which is I think that what happened was, and I'm guessing a little bit here, but you know, Chris Anderson comes from a war magnum background. He's a conflict photographer intrinsically. I think what he did was he took the pictures they were expecting, but when they didn't know he was taking the portraits, such as the one of Rubio, which is the side on, I don't think Rubio knew that picture was being taken, but Anderson took it. And what the Vanity Fair have done and Anderson have done is they've gone, right, we'll edit from the moments in between. We will take the pictures which, okay, the JD Vance one, he knows he's being photographed, kind of, but he's doing up the button. And it's those moments in between sometimes which are the most interesting photographs. But I think also what's interesting is that we were going to talk a little bit about publishing in our end of year roundup, which is what this is meant to be. But I think what Vanity Fair have shown here is not only the power of the photograph, but the power of the magazine, because they're going to run these over 2 issues, which is unheard of nowadays, to not just put everything online in one go. But Bill, I think you probably want to pick me up on my thought process on the.
I do, because I think some of these pictures I agree with you. There are some off moments here. I mean, there's a lot of pictures to look at, so generalizing is hard. But there's also some where the subjects are looking right at the camera and they're this close, and they had to know, that they were being shot from a very tight distance, and they probably weren't wearing makeup. So anyway, you know what? I would like to read one little thing, and maybe direct listeners to this one photographer writing on Threads, and she, I thought, did just a brilliant job of examining this. She posts under clouds and coffee. She's been a photographer for a long time. And she's talking here about the picture of Carolyn Levitt, the press secretary, in her sort of red pantsuit or whatever it is, standing in front of a fireplace. And she writes, if the chair had been turned at an angle away from the camera, which any interior photographer would have done, because this is a terrible angle for the chair, the image would have centered her authority. Instead, it's fully open to the camera, emphasizing the absence of the person meant to occupy it. She stands off to the side of it, visually subordinated to the chair itself, as if her position is defined in relation to whoever sits there, rather than as the one who holds it. She goes on to talk about the wrinkles and the wrinkles in the flag, and the fact that one of the lampshades is askew, and it just draws a lot of great detail from that.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually saw that. I saw that post as well. I read that and thought that. I think for me, coming to the end of this year, when there has been so much talk about AI, there's been so much talk about photographic perfection, and a number of the people who don't get these pictures are sort of saying, well, why didn't you Photoshop it? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? At last, at the end of 2025, we've got a body of work there that really explains why photography is important, why it will always exist outside of AI, doesn't matter whether it's digital or analog or whatever, and that actually perfection is boring and has got nothing to do with reality. There you go. I've silenced the pair of you way too early in this episode.
I think that's kind of that. I think that's a take, and that's a completely legitimate take. I still think this is not merely recording what's in front, but it is making a statement because it is edited. Everything is edited. You edit, you decide what you're going to show to people. It doesn't take more than a second to say to your assistant, go over there and straighten out the flag, smooth out the cushion on the chair. If you don't do those things and you don't retouch those things, you are making a statement.
But
I think it's fantastic.
Sure, but as Bill knows, when you choose the photographer, you know what you want, and he was chosen for a specific reason.
But he's also taken, he is a conflict photographer. But in more recent years, he's also done, terrific celebrity work. Martin Scorsese and Matt Damon and some other folks come to mind, and they are the ones that I saw that I can think of are close up. But they are not grotesque. They are close up and they are human, but they are not grotesque. Now, part of that, and here I'm being editorial, here he's taking pictures of people who are grotesque. These are people who stand behind having masked men throw people into vans without due process and sending them off to foreign countries where they've never set foot in. These are people without empathy and without grace, and he shot them as they are. And when I think about a picture that to me that reminded me, that connected for me, it's the Eisenstadt photo of Joseph Goebbels in a chair. That Eisenstadt, the little Jewish photographer, managed to take, and there was a look in Goebbels' eyes that says, this guy, masterminded the Holocaust. This guy, said yes to killing millions of people, and that's fair. That's legitimate.
Absolutely. But I think one of the reasons I was talking about Chris being from Conflict is he was very good friends with Tim Hetherington.
Of course.
And I first spoke to Chris back in 2012. And we spoke about that. It's on the United Nations Photography website. And if you're going to go through that experience of actually being in conflict, and then you're going to be given the opportunity to photograph these people responsible for so much heartache and so much unpleasantness at the minute, you are going to bring yourself to that. And I think that's, for me, the key to these images. This is somebody saying, I've seen what you do on the front line. Now I'm going to show who you are. And I don't think photography is the best way of showing that. Anything else is interpretation. But we can't spend the whole of this end of the year.
Even though we are very, very pleased to end this year with Chris Anderson and that fantastic shoot. And
yeah, we are. It's our Christmas gift. So what I wanted to do, as we always do, have a little look back and have a little look forward. Good things and bad things, what's been going on. Fee, exhibitions, what's been good?
What's been good? Well, I kind of did a little count up of a little roundup for myself of how much I've seen this year, because last year I saw over 40 exhibitions, 45 exhibitions or something, over 30 of which were photography exhibitions. And that seemed like a lot. If I had a few more than that. This year, the numbers are down. Not as many exhibitions in general. And I think somewhere around 25-ish photography exhibitions. And I go to the opening of an envelope. So quite frankly, I don't think I've missed too many of them. So I feel that we're a little bit down in terms of what we're being offered in this part of the world at the moment. I saw mostly in the UK, went to Paris. It didn't work out terribly well in Paris this year because Maison Européenne de la Photographie, Jeu de Paume, Cartier, they were all closed or they were all in between exhibitions and stuff. So Paris was a bit of a bust for me, except for the two terrific exhibitions I saw there, one of which was Avedon in the American West and one which was a Douaneau retrospective. But a lot of places that had a lot of good exhibitions, photography exhibitions last year, just didn't this year. So most notably, I would say the Saatchi Gallery here in London, it had at least four major exhibitions last year. It had As We Rise, we had Beyond Fashion, it had Edward Burtynsky, it had an Anya Samoylova. They didn't really have anything much this year.
I wonder.
I'm not sure what's going on.
Well, the economy has got to play a part in this. I mean, we've spoken about the cost of putting on exhibitions and the fact that a lot of spaces now seem to be booked up years in advance. There does seem to be a thing now that we have to book everything in advance. There's a band I wanted to see recently, and I've got a book for next September. Well, I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow, let alone next September. Bill, what about for you for exhibitions? I know you had a good time at Paris Photo.
I did. I had a great time at Paris Photo, which allowed me to see, like 100 tiny exhibits, which was great. And at Paris Photo, and I've talked about this a few weeks ago with you, but Jack Davison's show at the Cobb Gallery, which felt to me like sort of a modern August Sander collection of portraits, was great.
But interestingly, those pictures, I think, they were almost like a soft version of what Anderson has just done with the White House.
Yes, black and white, and very, very human, a little more stylized, and interestingly, very small and gem-like. So I really like them so much, and I ended up actually buying a couple, which is something I don't often do. So I was all in. Also a great show at Paris Photo by a young Ghanaian photographer named Carlos Aiden Tawia at the Galleria Alta. was beautiful and moving, and I was fortunate enough to be able to write something about that. Um, Great exhibit, Louis Stettner at the Hewlett Collection, and he also had a huge exhibit which I missed at Arles, which I heard a lot of great things about. For me, I got lucky. I was in Mexico City and I saw this gigantic sweeping Salgado exhibit just maybe a week before he died, at the Anthropology Museum. And if that tours, I would highly recommend people to see it. It was room after room and just wonderful. I saw the Ed Burkinski show at ICP in New York, which was absolutely marvelous and moving and stunning and just incredible.
Was that
Um,
Bill? Was that extraction abstraction?
uh, I think so. I can't honestly remember the name. So that sounds right.
I mean, they kind of extreme. It's like, well, actually, all in a good way, all Ed Burtynsky exhibitions look the same. But that
Yeah.
was the one that was in London last year. It's massive. It's fabulous, and it
Yes.
is touring, so that's probably
It's fantastic. I caught while I was at Perry Photo, I did go to the is it MAP, the Museum European
it.
Photography.
Yeah, European La Photographie.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I saw an Edward Weston and Tyler Mitchell exhibit, both which I thought were
Yeah.
disappointing. Um, but my real disappointment of the year was the Deanne Arbus show at the Armory in New York, which was really a lesson in how not to curate an exhibit. The pictures were terrific. The curation was heavy-handed and abysmal.
That's something I spoke about on the podcast, I think, when I was on my own without you guys. And just a really good example of how to not be sympathetic to photographic work
Terrible.
when you're showing it. Have you had anything you haven't liked in the last year, Fee?
Um, I haven't. Well, tell you what, I want to actually. I haven't said anything. I haven't said anything I did like so far. So let me just actually set the record straight. There wasn't so much to look at generally, but I did pick at there were uh, several wonderful exhibitions in unusual places, different places. So one of them was, of course, the Steve McQueen Resistance exhibition at the Turner Contemporary, which we spoke about on an earlier episode of the podcast, which I would love to tour. I'm not sure it would necessarily have resonance outside of the UK, but I think I went up to Edinburgh anyway. And it's lovely to see a photography exhibition outside of London in Turner Contemporary down in Margate that was beautifully curated. This was beautifully curated. It had a narrative. That was the really important thing. You could actually walk around it and it told a story, and it had a ton of photographers whose work you did know and photographers who you didn't know and anonymous people, and that was great. And that was a total, well, the other one that I thought was amazing was actually in Newport Street Gallery, the Power and the Glory, which was this exhibition of photographs of atomic explosions in the U.S. and over Japan, basically. I went back to see that several times because I found it astonishingly moving, not only because of the subject matter and the obvious reasons, but just because it was also beautifully curated. The space is huge. It was very, very clearly and carefully laid out. The light was wonderful, and they were pairing it with sculpture as well. And then the third one that I saw, again, so Newport Gallery belongs to Damien Hirst. It's very, I don't know if they ever have photography exhibitions there. I think this might have been the first one. And then the third new place for photography in London that I saw a fantastic exhibition was Ravens Row Gallery in Liverpool Street, which had Peter Hujar. And my God, that was just so beautiful. But the funny thing is, all three of these exhibitions, smallish images, all black and white, all similar presentations. And it wasn't in any way, shape, or form boring. It was just that you could trace what was going on. There was a narrative. It was easy to see. It was lovely. It worked beautifully.
I think one of the things, as somebody who doesn't live in a central urban environment anymore, I think there is a huge problem, which is growing with photographic exhibitions only appearing in London, Paris, New York, or major cities. I know In the States, it's slightly different. The universities tend to have good gallery spaces and put on good bodies of work. But certainly in the UK, we are a bit of a wasteland the moment you get outside of London. So for me, I'd love to see more traveling exhibitions. And more spaces being utilized, as you say, for exhibitions going forward. That would be my wish. I don't think it's going to be rewarded because unfortunately the funding isn't there.
True, but one thing that you did wish for last year, that we did wish for in an earlier thing that I wish that is coming true. Somebody listened to us. Did you know that Photo London is leaving Somerset House?
No, I didn't. No.
Well, they listened to you, Grant.
How
So,
exciting. Is it going to move next door?
No. So basically, one of the venues, talking about things that don't work and so on, one of the venues that I love, that's a very beautiful venue in central London, but we bash it a lot because it's not a terrific place to see photography. It's not a terrific place to see art. Generally, is Somerset House, which is this old, beautiful Admiralty building with high ceilings and small rooms and terrible, terrible placement of information and so on and so forth. And regularly, every time I see an exhibition there, Photo London, Sony World Photo, whatever else it is, I come back to Grant and I say terrible things about it, and then he says worse things about it.
Well, I do, because I remember it as a kid being the place where all the government files were kept. And what is now the fountains in the middle of the building used to be the car park.
Well, basically, it may be going back that way but they're now moving to Olympia. And Olympia is like Paris Photo, only like two Grand Palais. It's enormous.
No, it's falling apart.
It's no. Olympia has been completely rebuilt,
Okay.
renovated. It's brand new.
Okay. All right. My
And it's down the road from me. So
cynicism must stop. I saw the Bertram Mills Circus and Rod Stewart in the 1970s playing live there. So they're my memories of Olympia. But this is getting far too UK and London focused. Bill, what's been happening on the photo book front? Give me the good, the bad, and the ugly.
You got it. I don't think I can say I looked at every photo book that came out, and there's even some of the ones at Perry Photo that won awards. I just sort of glanced at. So this is by no means a scientific discussion here, but a few that I really loved. The first one I will mispronounce terribly, Cherry and Mushki, by Nikolay Barakov and published by Stanley Barker Books. So this was a photographer, a Russian photographer who, during these sort of oppressive 80s, left his, civil service job or somewhere and started going to the rivers, which was the only place where Russians could sort of let their hair down. They could be unclothed. And so he made these great riverside portraits, really touching, of lovers and families and friends. And it's just a really surprising and great book. Going completely the other direction, there's a young photographer in the States named Henry O. Head, and his book is called 12 Acres, published by Twin Palms. It's his first monograph about growing up in the Ozarks and the bonds of friendship, and it's subtle, it's beautifully designed in a moody way, and the great photographer Brian Schutmat helped on the book, and you can sort of feel that American, for me, spirit in it.
Well, I think Twin Palms, they have never produced an ugly book.
No, it's a lovely book.
Yeah.
This is not a book per se, but the issue of Horseshoe magazine is book-like. It's maybe an inch thick, and and this particular issue is dedicated to Stephen Shore, and it's an incredible retrospective, and there's a nice Q&A with Todd Heido. Jim Krantz's Frontier, which shows us the West, it's published by Gost, shows us the West as we think about it, and also as we mythologize it, and as we've never seen it in sort of a psychedelic wash. Paris, A Love Story is a book I worked on. Todd Webb, the American photographer who spent 4 or 5 years in Paris, published by Damiani. His photographs are really sweet and they haven't been seen before. Um, and Robbie Muller's LA Polaroids, also from Stanley Barkler. He was a Dutch or is a Dutch cinematographer who worked for Wim Wenders on Paris, Texas, and Repo Man. And he had to spend a few months in LA at this sort of Santa Monica beachside hotel apartment, and he took Polaroids there, and it really does a very nice job of capturing the light and the feel of that area. And then I want to give you one that I'm going to get in trouble for. Hopefully, we'll probably get letters from this.
Good.
I haven't finished it, but I'm deep into Sally Mann's artwork on the creative life, and I can't stand it.
Okay. Well, do you know what? I picked it up. I thought, I better get this. I looked through it in my local bookshop, and I put it down. And I thought, why do I need this in my life?
Well.
It is so disappointing to me. I mean, I love her work, but the book is overwritten by half. It's that self-deprecating in a fake kind of way, and she goes from the sort of she's in love with her own writing, and she swings from this intentionally folksy, cussy, and I'll have another gin, to dropping these 10-cent thesaurus words like perfidious, neologisms, sang-froid, acerbous, pervid. And it's so pretentious. And I didn't find there to be any real advice on living a creative life. She's like, write letters, practice, have another gin. And it rang hollow.
I think Fee may just go along with the have another gin as excellent advice for a creative practice. But I have to say, I think it's that difficult second album syndrome. The first book I thought was good. And now she's got the second book. And I think the first book was a lot more successful than she thought and anyone thought it was going to be. And now the second book is kind of, now I need to be a writer. Fee, jump in at this point.
I'm just going to say, do many photographers, and I'm asking this, do many photographers really write good books, as in books with writing in them?
Man Ray's.
Man Ray, yeah. Well, we both were reading that at the same time. Okay, right. Man Ray.
Okay, that's about it then. Well, it leads. Well, it leads.
Although actually, eye to eye, Erwin Blumenfeld is quite interesting.
Okay.
But that's Man Ray and Erwin Blumenfeld. Yeah.
Well, it takes us into an interesting area because my most disappointing book of the year was by somebody who's recently died, which was Martin Parr, and that was his autobiography, which I did talk about on the podcast. And it's always difficult when you're talking about people who have just passed, because the autobiography came out just about a month before he did die. And we've lost a few photographers this year, Salgado, Toscani, Christine Perkins, Parr. And just like with the Christopher Anderson pictures, social media went mad. Social media went mad for the death of Martin Parr, as did television and everything. Even my father, who I rang up, said, "Oh, your friend died." And my dad's 88 and has no interest in photography whatsoever. So what do we think about where social media is going with all of this?
Well, I'm going to, just about the Martin Parr thing for a moment, I think from my observation of the outpouring of emotion, he was a very high profile British photographer. So every British photographer almost who I know had something. He was a lovely man. God help us when poor old Bailey pops his clogs, it'll basically be impossible out there for a while.
You say that, but I think the difference is that Martin actually kind of became more relevant in the last few years than whilst Bailey was relevant through the 60s and 70s. I don't think well, I know my students don't know Bailey, but my students do. They know Martin Parr. Oh, yeah.
Why do you think he became more relevant recently?
Because he was very clever in keeping himself. I say that Martin for me was an enigma because he was quite a socially awkward person, and yet he was very social. And he had his foundation, so he opened up the Martin Parr Foundation. There were lots of exhibitions. He welcomed people into it, lots of talks and events. And really, I know it was in Bristol, which was good for me, but it was one of the very few places in England where photographers could go and just hang out or see interesting things and meet interesting people. And I've never seen so many photographs of photographers photographing themselves with Martin Parr. It was just incredible.
And I thought, actually, now you mention it about the relevance thing, he also shot for American Vogue, like in the last 5, 6 years or something, which was odd.
Yeah, he had a big exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery with Grayson Perry. He did adverts for Gucci and for Bird's Eye Frozen Foods. So, and he brought out more books than is humanly possible.
Yeah, but is it photography or is it marketing?
I think it's probably both. I think it's probably.
Let me ask you this. So I am not, I know Martin Parr's work. I would not call myself any kind of an expert on it, but whenever he was talked about before he died, there was a certain amount of controversy or discussion about whether he was punching down, whether he was making fun of people in his photographs. That discussion point seemed to go away when he died. In the many voluminous posts about him, where mostly people were posting pictures of themselves with him. To your point, Grant. So I guess this raises two questions for me. One is, what do you think of that discussion or controversy? And then also the sort of deification and blemish smudging once somebody dies.
I think that there were a number of things around the edge for him in particular, over the last few years, which I know quite a lot about, which I think were unfair, and he made some bad decisions. But I think overall, the punching down thing, I think this is a real problem that photography has, because when we're talking about the Anderson pictures, are we talking about the photographer punching down because we don't like the people and so they're showing them as they are? Or I think the situation with Parr was he was obsessed with class, and therefore that was his subject matter, which goes...
I just want to say, I don't think Chris Anderson was punching down.
No, I don't either. But okay. I don't think Parr was either.
Okay, well, say why not? Because my impression, and I don't really understand the British class system.
You've got an American and somebody
and an Irish person. You've got an Irish person,
yeah,
and an American. So class schmass.
Yeah, exactly.
But my sense of some of those photos is that he was making fun of them. Tell me why that isn't so.
I think because I don't think he was making fun. I think he was showing it's very difficult. The class system in this country, particularly when he was making most of his work, was very, very clearly identified as to which class you were from. And I have a real problem with it because I come from a very, very working class background. However, I would not be perceived as that, because there is a feeling of remaining within class. And I can name many, many other photographers who've made documentary bodies of work around class who don't get judged the way Martin did. I think that Martin, in some ways, was his own worst enemy when he was making a lot of that work. in that he wasn't good at explaining it. And photography was seen in a different way in this country. And I think over the last few years, I think he got better at explaining it. And I think he got better at kind of putting it into a context, which is why there is no doubt that in Britain, I think, if from a photographic education perspective, he is the most influential photographer there has been for the last 20 years.
But let's not forget also in his sorry to interrupt, Grant, but he didn't only take pictures of working class people looking as if he did this exactly the same thing to everybody, including, home counties Tories.
Yeah, Tories, the pop,
everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah, he did it to everybody. He was interested in all areas of class. But anyway, we can't turn this into a par-a-thon. We must try and stick to our very vague brief. I asked, where we think social media is going, because it is so relevant to everything at the moment. I know, Fee, that's an area that you particularly are interested in at the minute.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that I have noticed that I'm kind of tracking at the moment, partly because I have photography students, I have a lot of creative direction students, I have fashion students, and so for all of these, particularly these young people who are coming into the creative industries and so on, I'm trying to pay a lot of attention to what's going on. One thing so AI comes into this a bit, but social media. You've talked a lot, Grant, in the past about stock imagery and the fact that stock imagery is stock libraries are dying, and we all know that AI is one of those things that's kind of killing that as well. One of the not funny, one of the funny things I'm seeing at the moment is a sort of a rise in curated, trend-led image making being sold. Basically, it's a new kind of stock library. And there's a few of them around. Pinterest is developing in that way, but the one in particular I shall name is called Death to Stock. And what it is a photo library. You subscribe, you become a member. It's something like, how much is it? It's about, agencies pay about $70 a month. Brands pay about $20 a month, that kind of thing. And it gives you the ability to rent visuals or to buy visuals. Obviously, they are paid for in different ways. But rather than the way a traditional stock agency would say, right, we have pictures of cars, we have pictures of mountains, we have pictures of carrots. They do by trends. They go by trends. So they actually are led by a small group of people who are cool hunters and trend finders and so on.
Can you give us an example of one of those trends? Like, I just want to know what you mean.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of them yesterday.
Come on, Bill. I just thought you'd be ahead of trends.
They'll take something like athletics and women in sports, but they will pull it down. So they don't label everything, but they will show you particular kinds of pictures of particular kinds of people doing particular kinds of things.
Okay.
So rather than, in the old days, a picture editor would go, right, I need some pictures of some young people doing sports for Nike. They can go and they can look at this and they can find curated bodies of work by one photographer that are much more trendy looking, much less generic. But of course, so when you look at it from the other point of view, this sounds like a really potentially interesting thing. So it is going gangbusters. All my students think this is a terrific idea, but then so what did the photographer get out of this? So the way they find photographers is that you can submit, you can pitch. You can pitch your work to them. If they like it and they get their members to vote on whether to accept your work or stuff, they'll buy it from you. And they'll take all rights. And can I find out how much they pay for you? Of course not.
Oh, do you know what, Fee? I'm sorry, but to rain on your parade, but this is the horrible sense.
It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible. That's what I'm saying.
It sounds like a bunch of
terrible thing.
It won't last more than 2 minutes. It's a bunch of venture capitalists getting in a room thinking this is how we're going to make money with no understanding of how the industry works.
It's
He's
no,
somewhat,
no, 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 no. My point about this is
yeah.
that first of all, it has been going for 2 years, and second of all, the audience they're going for is not us, but they work with Nike, with Apple, with Google, with LVMH, um, and they are marketing themselves on Instagram this way. It's basically what it is. It's a brand new social media led way of doing the same old thing, which is taking photographers' work for very little money or no money and exploiting it.
Well, it sounds horrific. I mean, having been in those rooms back in the days of dot-com boom and listened to those people, and I know you've been in those rooms as well, Bill, and so have you, Fee, with people coming up with great ideas and not understanding how things work. We shall wait and see. Sorry, Bill, you wanted to join in. I'm very end of yearish at the minute. I'm quite,
Well, I mean, I do honestly wonder because there are so many more people now with cameras, and I'm not saying that these are people who are great photographers, but there's a lot more people shooting out there. I do, I haven't seen the site fee. I will, and I'll look at it. But if Apple and Nike are using the pictures, they're obviously really probably quite good. Um, but I do wonder if because there's so many more people taking so many more pictures, if gambits like this might be able to self-sustain for a while because people are giving it away and it's terrible. I don't know if people are getting credit on the Nike ad or on the no, it's right.
It works like a standard stock photo library. But the
Mhm.
dangerous thing, and I think it's a dangerous thing, is if we love photography, we love photography and we love photographers, and we don't want to see photographers, especially young photographers or marginalized photographers, being ripped off any more than they already
Oh,
are.
we are.
But
Yeah.
I think this is the leading edge of I think the opposite to you, Grant. I think that this is going to grow because they're doing so well and because their business model is obviously very successful and because the people who I know who are loving it are the people who are going into the industry who are quite in their 20s, 30s, who are not thinking about the fact that photographers aren't going to make any money. So obviously, I had a look at some of their contributors, and they tend to be uh, young Europeans. I see mostly so far. I look at their Instagram accounts; they have about 3 to 6,000 followers, and you can see their work. And if you have a look at the kind of work that these people do, there's so much of it about it's lovely, it's fine. But because they don't, and I think we're going to get into the now death of prints thing here, because the traditional outlets for people who take pretty pictures of kind of like models with kind of like fading backgrounds and flashes of light and stuff like that, because those kind of the outlets they would once have had are dying away. Places like these agencies are going, yeah, give us 20 of your pictures and we'll pay you and we'll use it. And at least your work will actually be seen, but you won't get credit.
yeah. Well, I suppose really, as a roundup for the year, my feeling is that we're moving away from the world of perfection in photography because the idea of perfect looking images is so easy to replicate that and has no soul. And therefore, going forwards into 2026, as a photographer, the key is to avoid all of that kind of stuff, to avoid what you're saying, Fee, and try and do something different. But as you were about to say, traditional magazines are very much dying as a revenue stream for photographers, and it was a key revenue stream, editorial photography for all of us. Strangely, the power of the Vanity Fair, that issue is interesting. Shows that an old school magazine. I've got people I've seen saying, can you get that issue in the UK? Suddenly, it's a hot potato. People want that. I just watched the New Yorker documentary, which is superb, which really shows, I mean, it showed me how magazines once were when I was on them, and it made me fall in love again with all those kind of crazy characters we used to work with and great old school ways of working. And they claim to still be doing okay.
I still think, I just would say that the thing about the New Yorker that's also interesting, and again, it's a social media point here, is the New Yorker now has a photo account on Instagram, and they have their photography of the year and everything. The New Yorker only started running photography when Tina Brown became the editor in the 90s. You know, it had 70 years of photography was like,
Well,
completely
it's
revolting.
funny you say that because if you watch the documentary, you'll see that they were actually running photographs right back just to after the Second World War with one particular issue on Hiroshima. And they were the first magazine to bring the
Yes.
reality of Hiroshima. So, but you're right. They didn't start commissioning photography
Yeah.
until Tina took over with an Avedon, and then Steve Pike took over from Avedon. So but there's something interesting there. But I think if we're going to sort of think about, where photography is now and where it's going, I just think there's total confusion. But it's kind of not the end of photography, but the end of the beginning of photography. So everything we once knew is now ending, but something new is starting. What do you think, Bill?
I think it's the middle of the end of the beginning. There's no question about that.
Thank you for that clarity.
Yes, no problem. I mean, I like what you're saying about authenticity in pictures to rub up against the sort of pseudo perfection of AI pictures, and I think that's a good take. Mostly, I'm depressed. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, on that bombshell, um, are you looking for anything for the forward for the 2026 for photography, Bill?
Well, I'm always hopeful, and this sort of to your point earlier, Fiona, that we can come up with the photo community can come up with new ways to exhibit and show photographs that don't require expensive framing and matting and maybe even brick and mortar. And I think to the extent that people can think about zines or projections or pop-ups or just lo-fi, low-cost ways to get people to look at pictures, all the better. And I'm hoping there's more creativity in 2026 along those lines.
Fiona.
I think to add to that, Bill, one of the things that I would love people to do, whether it's exhibitions or mostly in exhibitions, I guess, really, is for photographers to speak, to actually have voices, literally speak. I mean, more like you do with the podcast, Grant, and so on. But on the non-photography exhibitions, and not just photographers, but to actually use their voices to talk more about photography and exhibitions. So the exhibitions, some of the exhibitions that I've gone to that were not about photography, you can you can scan a QR code and you can actually listen to someone. You can listen to the artist talking about the work, and I feel that adds an awful lot. Surprisingly, I'm surprised by how much it adds. But if I may name a non-photographer for a moment, Kerry James Marshall, the painter, the exhibition that's been on at the Royal Academy is the best exhibition of anything I've seen this year. But also they have recordings to accompany the work. And I was, as I think I said to you, Grant, when we were talking about the Lee Miller exhibition, I walked around and I listened to a podcast about Lee Miller and Rowan Penrose. And I just feel you need to bring a bit more to it rather than just, as you say, Bill, just putting a picture on a wall or whatever. Talk, give people a bit more about the work. So that's one thing. But the other thing I'm going to say is, yeah, I think there's creativity. I have beside me here, I'll post a picture of this later. I have 12 inches, 30 centimeters of paper products that all use photography in them. They're not the old-fashioned traditional magazine things, but there's some fantastic stuff out there.
Can I
Okay.
say one?
Yeah.
I do want to say one thing. Fee, I like your note about photographers' voices, and again, that is um, running counter to AI, right?
Yes,
Which is made
exactly,
from an AI pictures made from 100,000 pictures.
exactly.
And one of the things that I've started doing in the photo books that I've been putting together and editing and helping photographers with, and your comment just made me realize maybe why. Is I'm doing more Q&A instead of writing like a long blah blah appreciation of and contextualization. I'm doing Q&As with the photographers in the books to hear where they're coming from, what they're seeing, what they were thinking when they were making the picture, what they regret, what they loved. And the feedback I'm getting from readers and buyers of the book is very strong. And I think part of that thread is there is a person who made these pictures.
Exactly.
Do you know, I
Exactly.
think
And
that's the
it's
way
like,
forward for 2026, isn't it? Is that actually, I think with the personal will become increasingly important, and the photographer's voice will become increasingly important going forwards if we are going to deal with the digitalization of
exactly. As
everything
Bill
else.
is saying, it's the anti-AI thing. When it's AI, it's like, okay, you're sitting there, there's prompts. When there's a human being and a camera or a phone, whatever it is, you can say to that person, where were you standing? What were you thinking? Why did you do that? What was it like? That's the narrative, and that's what we need more of as well.
So don't be afraid of AI. Don't be afraid of the new world. Embrace it, but put yourself at the front of it, I think is the way forward, just like you two do every month without fear or favor. Listen, guys, thank you so much for all your hard work over this last year. Bill, I know you want to get another word in edgeways. Go on.
I do, just because somebody sent this to me yesterday, and I would like to read it because I kind of liked it as a wrap up or a look forward.
Go on.
And it's simple. It's life is like a camera. Focus on what's important. Capture the good times. Develop from the negatives. And if things don't work out, take another shot.
On that note, I say thank you, Bill. Thank you, Fiona, and I'll see you in 2026.
Happy New
Thanks.
Year.
Happy New Year.
And a happy new year to you, listeners. Also, thank you very much for all of your support over the last year, for the emails, the texts, the messages, and of course, for listening. Onwards and upwards into 2026 is what I say. And of course, take care.